We are waiting on our guest today, which is going to be Carolyn. So, sent her an invite, so give her a minute to get on here. There she is. Let's see. Unable to join. Awesome. Love it. Let's try this again. Try to send another request. My camera's crooked. There we go. Maybe it'll work. Try again. Unable to join. Damn. What the heck? I don't know what's going on. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulty. Let's try this. Go live. There we go.
Yes. I was like, why is this not?
It always happens. I'll be honest. I've done like a million of these lives, and I think it's only worked the first try like 3 times ever.
I don't know.
I don't even know why.
It's cursed. Honestly, it's just cursed. You need to stop doing IG lives, apparently.
I have no idea why exactly, but okay. I did get some questions. So let me see if I can pull those up on here.
Yeah, it was cool because on the very bottom there's a little question box.
Shows them there too.
Yeah. Got some good questions in there already.
Okay. Sweet. Okay, guys. So thank you everyone for joining, and Carolyn, thank you for joining.
Hey, thank you for the invite, Austin.
Yeah. So this is actually Carolyn's topic idea. So we want to talk about longevity, and we can relate that to competitors. We can relate that to, you had mentioned like even disease, talking about disease risk throughout the lifespan. So all things longevity. I think it's a cool topic too, because now when you go online, there's like a million biohackers, trying to solve everyone's problems, right? So things can get pretty confusing in that regard. But if you guys have any longevity related questions, whether it's competing or maybe like disease risk, something you're concerned about, family history, really anything like that, that's kind of fair game. So go ahead and drop in questions for us. So how did you come up with the topic? Was there something that inspired you?
Yeah, so this last week was going through some family history, and breast cancer does run in my family, especially on my mother's side and both grandmothers. And so now that I'm reaching 31, and so she ended up having breast cancer at 46. And with breast cancer, we know it's always good to start checking 10 years earlier than when, say, the mother had it. So through these annual checkups, it's also really important to have this in mind when doing HRT. because when I'm going through my own HRT journey as well, I'm trying to make sure that, say, for one out of many is just estrogen. Is estrogen in line, and making sure that what I'm taking is not going to exacerbate, say, the cancer possibility too.
Yeah.
So that was one that came up in the last week, and I was like, this would be a good topic.
Yeah. No, it's a great topic. So actually, let's start on that, because that's a cool one, because HRT is really hot right now, and for good reason. And I've definitely run into some folks that are concerned about the estrogen piece. Like, do we support estrogen? Do we not support estrogen? Some do cite like family history. Some maybe cite just the fact that like they've heard something somewhere, right? So we can talk about that a little bit. And I think there's really two main things there that I think are often missed in that equation. And one is that HRT should be a replacement dose. So first things first, like making sure that the dosing is correct and making sure that the levels are within a range that is acceptable and proper for the person. So I'm sure that's something that you've been kind of going through yourself.
Yep, it was very low dose, just taking the labs that were taken, and then from that you can evaluate, okay, what can we do naturally in order to support it as much as we can. Of course, that was all leading up before the decision of taking HRT was made.
Sure. Right. And then, so assuming that part is in line, the second piece would be like understanding that just because you have a certain level of estrogen in the body doesn't really tell you how you're metabolizing it or what your body is doing with it. So that's kind of the second big piece to this, and that when you start really getting into things like hormone metabolism, especially those that have maybe looked at like Dutch tests and things like that, you'll see that different pathways that we metabolize estrogen through have different effects, right? So estrogen in and of itself isn't really the bad guy. It can be protective. It has a lot of benefits, and it's necessary. So to add it to an HRT protocol, if the person needs it, is going to be really beneficial, but we want to make sure that they are metabolizing it correctly. So are there things that you've been looking at or maybe doing to support that piece?
Yeah, so even before, so in the initial phase when talking with the HRT clinic, we did end up running a Dutch, because I did want to see, how does the metabolizing going in the first area, but then also there was at least already a huge set of labs over the course of the last 2 years before, we were able to decide, okay, which path do we want to take to? And so the easiest and most conservative path was always going to be taking a low dose testosterone. So we can start to see how that affects, and just doing, like you said, a replacement dose and then working from there. And then we saw, okay, well, maybe this is not enough. So maybe do twice a week, very minimal dose again, because I'd rather have someone be very conservative when they're first starting out with HRT, because again, it's so easy for many clinics that we see so often will want to run basically male numbers for females. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, like we can only go so high, and then we're going to have to pull back again, and we're going to be worse off if we end up trying to do these crazy numbers just so someone can make a buck. And so that's where we have to be really thoughtful in this whole process. And like you said, family history plays a part. How is the genetics in there? Is there someone else in the family that you can refer to? Because a lot of times too, as you've probably seen, a lot of clients, they just simply don't have the family history, or maybe they're adopted and they don't know, what's in their family history too.
Yeah, and so you brought up a really good point there in that estrogen coming from the testosterone part as well. So like I've dealt with a lot of, I would say at least a fair amount of HRT clients that don't actually need estrogen. They tend to already have lower testosterone levels. So when they support that aromatization into estrogen is often enough to support the client. So not every person necessarily has to take exogenous estrogen. Or if they are concerned, maybe they do err on the side of caution and just utilize whatever estrogen comes from aromatizing the testosterone. So that's one possible consideration for people. But like you said, some people do need more. So Some people will need like a cream perhaps, or an oral version. And you brought up a great point about dosing. When it comes to HRT, there are a lot of people jumping, a lot of clinics jumping on the bandwagon. There are a lot of people out there that are ready to make some money, right? So, and you've probably seen it. I mean, I know I've seen it. I've seen some absolutely horrendous numbers come in. I mean, I've seen women prescribed 200 milligrams of testosterone. And just for point of reference, like the people that don't know anything about HRT, in terms of testosterone, I mean, a female is probably going to be pretty normal to high normal in 3, 4, 5, 6 milligrams a week or so. I mean, like in somewhere in that realm. So I'm prescribed testosterone, and at 150 milligrams a week, my levels are like 900.
Yeah.
Just as a point of reference, we're looking at probably to try to stay under 100 for females a lot of the time, right?
If we're in that 70 to 80 range, we're doing good.
Sure.
We're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to the piece about metabolizing, again, we have a few different pathways that we metabolize estrogen through. First thing is, like, we got to get estrogen out of the body. So if you have any major gut issues or any sluggishness in the liver, anything like that, you're already going to have issues getting rid of it, right? So a lot of the time what we would call, like, you recycle it or recirculate it, and it's not really being excreted as heavily as it should. So those are things you want to look at first. And the second piece is, which pathways are we really metabolizing the estrogen through? So that's, for those of you that are Dutch testers, we're looking at that 16-OH pathway, that 4-OH pathway, and that 2-OH pathway being the main ones. The 2-OH is generally considered the protective pathway, right? 4-OH is considered normally the toxic pathway, or causing a lot of oxidative damage, a lot of stress on the body. And the 16-OH is a very estrogenic pathway, but it's not necessarily a toxic pathway. So if you are concerned, Dutch test is an awesome option for people, because, there are a lot of people, even that aren't on HRT, that are concerned with longevity or their hormones or whatever, and they don't even have high estrogen, but they still have estrogenic symptoms, and they're not really sure why.
And your body may not be methylating. You don't even know.
Right.
And I'm really glad that you brought up about the liver, because if it's not the muscles that we have in our body, but it's like, okay, how is the liver processing this? And we won't be able to soak in all the food that we have unless we have a proper liver. So really, that's another piece that I think is just so often overlooked. And it's like, hey, what can we do to support it from, like you said, if you are facing gut issues, hormonal issues, well, maybe it's time to, support the liver, because oftentimes, especially those our age in the 30s, we've had all these decades of, drinking and abusing it, all this time. But now people are starting to wake up and being like, hey, maybe the root of my issue, I should dig a little bit deeper, and maybe not just rely on the gut and hormone, but look at the liver.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So let's actually look at some of these questions too. So
yeah, peptides have been a hot topic as
okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. It's kind of a general question. They just talked about any peptides worth researching for optimal health. So they said BPC, glutathione, stuff like that. So we'll just give like a general overview of that. Is that something that you've got into at all?
Yeah.
Looking.
Yeah, so for just general, every day, just like with the aloe vera juice and L-glutamine, I will take the liposomal glutathione from Seeking Health, and it's just sublingual under the tongue every morning, 4 milliliters, and it's great. And I've been doing that since, when I just started taking HRT. I was like, hey, this is another option that I can do to support myself.
Yeah. I'm assuming they're probably referencing the injectable, so like injectable glutathione, and so I get that question a lot, which is technically it's not a peptide, but you see it on a lot of the peptide sites with a lot of the clinics. But A question I do get is, do you have to take injectable? So you mentioned liposomal. That's a delivery system that can work, right? Another option that works for a lot, not all people, but a lot of people is literally just taking NAC, which will convert to glutathione. So injectable isn't necessary if you don't want to inject. There are other options that you can look at for sure. They had mentioned BPC, but I think before we talk about any of the other ones, kind of talk about, I can go over like what a few of the peptides are. So one, a lot of the peptides don't have a lot of human research, so just kind of, take that for what you will. I know there's a lot of people out there willing to experiment on themselves, which is kind of their own, that's fine. That's their own thing. But if you're looking at what clinics and places that are actually prescribing will generally have available, you're probably going to be seeing things like healing type peptides like BPC 157 or TV 500. Those peptides are generally good for inflammation control. They will help create, a lot of them actually help create vessels and move more blood to injuries. So they help with like soft tissue repair, joint tissue repair, things like that. And then the other class that you'll see are normally secretagogue peptides. So we're talking like growth hormone secretagogue peptides. So there are a lot of them, but it seems like somarelin is one that a lot of the clinics seem to have, and I'm sure there's a reason for that. I'm sure there's like some kind of legality or reason that they're prescribing that versus the others.
They're borderline onto like I've seen more of the SARMs. It's like almost to the dark horse a little bit, but you're trying to keep it under the peptide like column.
Right. The growth hormone secretagogue peptides will really, what they're going to do is help you, in theory, is help create a bigger pulse of growth hormone from your body. You release growth hormone in a pulsatile fashion. It's supposed to help give you a bigger pulse. So beneficial for probably older folks that don't have a lot of growth hormone production as they age. Beneficial in younger people, probably not so much. I don't know that it's something that I would be spending a lot of money on or be overly concerned about.
If you were coming back, like the BPC, if you were coming back from an injury, bone related, or need to grow that muscle tissue back, and just aid in your recovery, great for younger folk. But again, I would honestly just continue promoting, do a pharmacy grade GH for above anything else.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of the clinics do have the option to prescribe pharmaceutical growth hormone. It's going to be expensive, but that option is there for them. Just make sure your pockets are deep.
Yeah, because if you want to do GH, make sure it's farm grade, please.
So there is. So here's a topic, or here's one that we can touch on too, and it's talking about thyroid, which we can lump that into longevity for sure. Mm-hmm. Talking about natural alternatives to thyroid supplementation. So I'm assuming they mean like natural alternatives to medication is maybe what they mean.
Yeah, I'm thinking more if they wanted just natural support. They mentioned about minerals and herbs to focus on.
Right. So first off, there's a lot of reasons you could have, hypothyroid or autoimmune thyroid issues or whatever it may be. So I think first thing would be to understand maybe why you have a thyroid issue, because most thyroid issues are usually a result of something else, right? They're a result of stress. They're a result of like nutrient deficiency. They're a result of a hormone imbalance, a result of a gut issue, something like that. Yep. Right? There are definitely people that do benefit from thyroid medication, like those that perhaps have had like extreme autoimmune disease and their thyroid gland is just damaged beyond repair, people like that are going to probably need it. Those that have had like thyroid removals, stuff like that, or thyroid injury over long periods of time. But a lot of people really have some kind of like secondary issue that is probably causing the thyroid to be dysfunctioning, I guess.
Yeah. Or even downregulated. So when asking yourself, okay, well, if my thyroid is downregulated or I went through a traumatic event, how do I support it now in through natural path areas? Again, we would want to see labs first for trying to single out the thyroid. So instead of like, okay, if you have a downregulated thyroid, well, did we see that in labs or did we take a Dutch test? Okay, like what's a little bit more background before we try to single out something. And this can be applied for anything. It could be through our gut, or if we're facing, I know brain inflammation is now starting to be more of a topic as well. So just looking into, okay, we have it, now what? What are our next steps? And so things like, one of the things I often tell clients, because we do try to keep, budget in mind always, is instead, hey, Brazilian nuts. That's another great option. And then also when you're looking at your foods, making sure you're having whole foods and dark leafy greens, incorporating, say, cod for that iodine, incorporating more of those foods, especially for those who may come to us, for hormonal imbalances. And we know that from the start. Then when building out the diet, it's like, hey, these are your options here.
Right. Getting enough selenium, getting enough iodine, getting enough of your basic minerals in the diet. I think there's not so much anymore, but there definitely was a time where when the if it fits your macros, crowd was really abundant, where people thought if you just ate a little bit of whole foods, you would never be susceptible to nutrient deficiency. And that's just really not the case, because, I mean, I can tell you probably at least half of the lab work I see, even on just the CBC, has some B vitamin deficiencies or zinc deficiencies or something, right? So even just starting there is a really great place to start, not only for your thyroid, but for, every body system. Because if you don't have the backbone for these functions, which are vitamins and minerals and things, then even if you're throwing other supplementation at it, you're not going to have the foundation to make these things work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And what I do is actually, that's another really great suggestion, because there's the app Chronometer, and that's where you can see exactly where you're deficient in, and just going into the app and just logging a typical day, see where you're deficient at, see if you're not getting maybe enough B vitamins, or if you need more C. There's little areas that you can see right off of the app.
Yep, I love that app. I have a lot of people track with that, and it's probably going to be more and more important, especially if you're dieting or lower calories, things like that. You're going to be, or if you're someone that maybe isn't now but had a history of that previously, because nutrient deficiencies are going to be pretty common if you've taken birth control for long periods of time, if you have GI issues, like any of that stuff. Deficiencies definitely happen. So, okay, cool. I'm going to look through here, see if there's any other.
Sure.
I'm trying to look at the chat feed too and make sure I didn't miss anything. Sometimes people ask questions there. I don't see any. Okay.
Yeah, we touched on it already, but it says, is there a place for insulin GH in longevity care for insulin Lantus specifically?
I think I know where this question comes from, because so we touched on the growth hormone a little bit, but so the insulin's an interesting thing. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there was some literature that came out, and I don't know if it was from the US. I think it had come from a different country, but they were kind of experimenting with like a low dose insulin to control glucose levels, because we know, pre-diabetes and diabetes, that the high glucose levels over time can damage vessels, it can damage tissues in the body, it can wreak a lot of havoc. I mean, we see this in diabetes, right? So the thought process was like, if we take a basal insulin, which Lantus, like a slow acting insulin at a low dose to control blood glucose, would that pose some kind of benefit to longevity over time? And I think that the answer to that is maybe, but the problem is that insulin resistance is really more than just blood glucose. You know, we have to look at insulin levels as well. So, for example, if you could indefinitely control blood glucose if you just kept taking more insulin, right? So, you know, I mean, I've had plenty of clients have come in that their glucose is an 80, which on paper looks fine, right? No issue there. But their insulin levels a 20 or a 30 or higher sometimes. So, you know, I think that if you were going to go that route, that you would always want to monitor your insulin level, which you would want to do that anyhow. We should really probably be seeing insulin levels. They say ideal is like a 5 or somewhere around there or less. But you should really be monitoring that, and also monitoring like your lipid profile. Like if you're seeing super high triglycerides all the time, like that's another potential insulin resistance marker. So don't just think like take more and more and more insulin, because you can make your blood glucose whatever you want if you just continue to take more.
Or, you know, depending on what you ate that day or how much water you're having that day too. So it also, I mean, the word longevity, I also want to key in on this piece, is that longevity as in what is sustainable. Is this going to be sustainable? If you're going to keep on stacking, you know, this over time, constantly tracking your blood glucose levels every single day and becoming neurotic about it, well, how long is that going to last for? You know, if you've had a very serious health condition, well, a different story. Yeah. But we have to think about when we're looking at longevity, and we see so inundated with all these biohacking and cold water temperature and sun and feet in the grass, you know, it's like, okay, well, how we have to think of the average person here. You know, what are they going to do on the day-to-day? Or Susie Q with her 3 kids, you know, what can we apply this to them? And then for Susie Q, but then also to the competitor as well. Yeah.
I mean, that's a great point, because if you just looked online, you would literally need 2 hours in the morning to go through your biohacking routine. And I don't know about anyone else, but if you're a productive adult that has either even a regular job, or if you own a business, you probably certainly don't have time to be doing those things, you know. So sustainability is certainly a concern. And also it's kind of counterproductive to add so much more to your plate and stress yourself out trying to, you know, perform some kind of routine, right?
Yeah.
Like we see this all the time in the fitness community, is just keep like, if I do this, it'll probably help this, until that list is so long that we're creating this neuroticism around the list.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Because you're constantly like, okay, well, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. and then have my 20 minutes of gratitude and yoga. It's like, okay, well, are we really going to de-stress? And you've probably seen it too, like the very type A client who's like, I want to like practice mindfulness, but their list in the morning is so long that, you know, they don't have any energy to expel for the rest of the day. And what does that do to their loved ones as well? When you're going about your day and you're so stressed about your journaling and your, you know, morning walks, well, what does the husband think about that too? You know, so it may cause more internal stress going on. So we want to look at the whole picture, but then also be mindful of like, hey, we do have a goal in mind. Say it is, you know, hormonal health. Well, there's all these little things that we do have to do, but we can do it in baby steps there as well.
Yeah. I know with those people, there's something that I always try to talk to them about, and this mindfulness or self-awareness around how they feel and around this feedback and all those things. What's really cool is when you've actually built it and it's very automatic. Like you don't have to do all the things anymore, right? You're able to just create this automatic process where the awareness is there. and you don't need to do the 20-step process to accomplish it anymore. I see that a lot in like client updates, for example, where they're the person that is kind of the oversharer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That update actually becomes shorter over time, but better, right?
Yeah.
It's more concise and more productive, but there's actually less in it,
Yeah.
right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so those routines should, like you said, they should reflect some kind of sustainability for sure.
Yeah. Especially when they do mention that, hey, these are the things that they enjoy doing together as a family, then I love to incorporate that, because then it goes to show that they're not just on the journey for themselves, but together. And that's where the transformation can not only happen with the client, but then also with the family itself, especially if they have, poor dietary habits and they want to get more active. It's like, okay, well, maybe every evening when the kids are back in school, well, let's just do an activity together, play basketball outside. It's summer. Like, let's go to the pool, do other things. And that's where a lot of de-stressing can happen without even working for it.
Absolutely. Anything you enjoy can probably be a stress reduction activity, unless it's like going to the gym more. That's probably not the one.
Gym.
Right. But this, I mean, outside of something that's super, strenuous physically, you can de-stress doing a lot of things. It doesn't have to be writing in a journal. It doesn't have to be, putting your feet in the grass. There's a lot of things you can do. Here's another question. We talked about hair issues from testosterone, like thinning hair in females. Maybe that's one we can talk about. Well, here's maybe we can broaden that up even more. I've had some female HRT candidates that are like, I don't want to take testosterone because, they hear about, they think, hair thinning, or they think it's a male hormone. So maybe we can just talk about that as like a general thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, again, we're going to look at the numbers, because again, when, HRT clinics are running, these new protocols, and was the hair thinning happening, immediately after you started taking the testosterone, or were there a couple weeks that went by, or they told you to increase the dose and that's when it happened too? And we also want to look for other features too, like, is there, a deepening of the voice, or is there more hair growth in other areas, or are we looking for the hair shedding too? Because again, like we have seen, it has led to, say, like PCOS, which happens pretty often as well because of testosterone imbalance. So those are a lot of things that we do want to see also on the labs. But yeah, it does happen, unfortunately, but there is a way that you can, reverse it too.
Right. So first off, start low, check your levels, right? It's a lot easier to go up than it is to go back, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's a good rule of thumb. Secondly, again, understand that total hormone levels are only one piece. The second piece is what your body does with them from a metabolism standpoint, right? So we know that just like estrogen, testosterone can metabolize a couple different ways, right? Again, like the Dutch test is such a great reference because we have that visual to use. So like looking at that 5-alpha reductase, and seeing, are we favoring 5-alpha reductase? Are we favoring 5-beta reductase? Are we somewhere in the middle where we probably should be, right? So if you are heavily favoring 5-alpha reductase, then of course you're going to be more susceptible to androgenic type of side effects, hair thinning, acne, body hair growth, virilization, like any of those side effects. So, if, as you said, another thing too is, what was your baseline? So before starting HRT or any hormone replacement, it's probably good to be functioning the best you can prior, because that's going to have such a huge bearing on what your body does once you put those hormones into play. It's just like anything else. We don't just take a new client in that's doing everything wrong and throw them on a SIBO protocol for their gut. Like there's probably foundational steps that we have to take to make sure, A, that it's going to work, and B, that they're going to sustain the result.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So that would apply here for sure.
And yeah, that's the thing too, because it's such a hard call, because we know these tests are very expensive, but they really can help us not shoot in the dark at the same time too. So when you are tackling these heavy hitter issues, then it's really important to not only get your labs, but then also do the Dutch test as well. So we can really see how your body is methylating these, whether it's going to be, you know, whichever direction we're going to have to go for the long run. Again, because you don't want to keep spinning your wheels that you may be already doing right now.
Right. And it's HRT, once the doses are dialed in and everything's functioning correctly, it's pretty straightforward from there. You know, you don't really have to change anything. It's going to be even keel. Males are obviously a little bit less complicated because you're just taking one hormone, but even for females, you know, it's generally pretty straightforward. There is one that I wanted to touch on a little bit with HRT that we didn't talk about, and that's progesterone.
Yes.
Because there's the interesting thing about progesterone is when we look at labs for a female that's having a menstrual cycle, we look for luteal phase, right? We're looking at a spike or a peak in progesterone. So for HRT, though, I think a mistake that people make when they're measuring levels is they're trying to like replicate this luteal phase level, and then when they do, they just feel like they're PMSing all the time because the dose is too high, right?
Yeah.
So I always tell people if we are adding progesterone into an HRT protocol, that we aren't treating you the same as a premenopausal female that's having an ovulatory normal cycle, because if you are riding here on progesterone all the time, you're not going to feel great, right? You're going to react pretty poorly to it.
Yeah. Especially when you notice like the fatigue and laziness is like starting to come over you. That's a really good sign to look for. And then also, especially too, just in my own journey too, we've actually done the 3 different types of progesterone that you can take, whether it's like it's a pill, or it's going to be the suppository, or it's going to be Velocigen now. So, but they're all the same dose. But again, the body's going to take it differently on every type.
Yeah, that's a great point. So delivery method, dosing, even timing, even just taking your progesterone at the right time of day is a detail that people kind of forget. You know, if the clinic's like, hey, we're taking 100 milligrams of progesterone, you're going to have a substantially different feeling when you take it at night. It's pretty sedative. Like, it definitely, anyone that's taken progesterone for the first time, it kind of knocks you out, right? You probably wouldn't want to take that when you got up in the morning, right? So like even little details like that are going to be important for sure.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to not only having a good clinic, but then also having good advisors in your back pocket. Because again, you don't want to be doing this alone, and just, you know, refer out, you know, reach out to Austin and I if you ever have questions too. It's like what journey to go on, or, you know, hey, this is how we would recommend you develop the plan for you if you are interested in HRT. Because again, there's a lot of precautions that go up into that decision, because it is a big decision to make.
Yeah, and I know we're doing a lot of HRT stuff, but it's relevant. And another one that I think is really important is I'm seeing a lot of really young people, especially females, probably go on it prematurely. And what I mean by that is they have the bad contest prep or the dieting or whatever it is, and their hormones are crashed, and they get the labs and they feel lousy and all these things, and someone's like, you should take HRT, or our clinic suggests HRT, and there's a lot of issues with that. Well, one, you probably weren't seeing a very accurate depiction of healthy hormones because you have not really attempted to pull yourself out of that state. So there's that. Second thing is, there is the potential for it to affect your fertility, right? You know, when we're taking exogenous hormones, it is going to, at the very least, suppress some of the endogenous function. So, ovulation and, your LH levels, your FSH levels, all these things are going to drop, at least some, right? You know, so if you're young, I highly suggest doing as much as you possibly can to restore function and taking the time to restore function early on, especially early 20s. Like I'm seeing these, 21, 22-year-old females going on HRT, and it's like, oh no, right? Because they want to get back to normal as quick as possible. Why? So they can do their next show, right? And
Really,
that can be a mistake.
yeah, especially when it's that young age that's happening right now too. And so many, competitors are also having HRT clinics be a part of the team. So it's just and the problem is that it is normalized in order to have that post-show phase, and it's like automatically going into HRT. And it's like, maybe, no, it's not. That's not exactly what you need after post-show. Maybe consider that, you just went through a really brutal phase. It's time to just take your time like you did through the prep and get yourself out. Because if you want to dig deep, you also know how to dig yourself out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking a little bit ahead, because like I said, the questions that I'm generally asking people are things like family planning and what are their long-term goals with competing. If I think I always kind of use this thought process of, let's say you've been bodybuilding, you are 22 years old and you've been bodybuilding for 3 years. Okay, well, you've only done 3 years 8 times in your life. And the first few times you did it, you don't remember. So like really 3 years is a large percent, is a pretty, large percentage of your life. But as you get older, that's going to become a less and less of a percentage. So you can understand, like, from a shelf life standpoint, you haven't really had a lot of experience with competing, with fitness, with any of this. So the patience, I get that being patient is difficult, but also understand that, like, you might not even want to do this in 2 years. You might want nothing to do with bodybuilding or competing when you're 25, and then now what? It's not something that you want to go back and regret.
Exactly. Yeah, especially because you want to look 10 years from now and realize, okay, well, now I just did all this damage to my body, and it's going to take me twice as long in order to get back, if that at all, be able to, after all the choices that you made when you were younger too. And yeah, I'm sure you and I, like, we would tell ourselves so many different things, what we could tell our younger selves, especially forum days, when that's all we had. That was the only information that we could rely on, was simply, asking questions through the forums and through magazines. But nowadays, we're very lucky, and I applaud that, there are a lot of younger athletes getting interested in the sport, but there's almost this information overwhelm too at the same time, because when you have so much information available to you, then who do you trust? And it doesn't have to apply just to the competitor, but to the lifestyle client who wants to look like their favorite influencer. Well, there's a lot of things you need to consider before, you would tackle whatever is happening on that black mirror.
Absolutely. Cool. So longevity, any other hot longevity topics that you want to touch on while we're here?
Ooh, yeah. Well, it's funny because the peptide question always comes up, pretty often as of lately too, especially with, because I was talking to Scott McNally, and he was talking about the IGF has also become prominent again. But again, whenever those, new peptides come up, for at least for muscle building, because that is the ultimate key for longevity, is maintaining and growing muscle. And especially as we get older, we want to make sure that we're still having an active lifestyle and maintaining that muscle, because that's going to translate over to everything else internally too. So, just continuing focusing on muscle building and not trying to diet down every single year.
For sure. Yeah. Research, there's actually research on that, talking about mortality and muscle. Like there is a connection between maintaining muscle mass, even like as people age, like falls and injuries and things like that, you see a lesser occurrence of those with people that have muscle mass, people that are active. So that's a great point.
Yep.
So here's one more that we can probably tackle, and that is, have you found for clients not on birth control that it's helpful to change nutrition around their menstrual cycle? So do you want to do that one first? Or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, you can fire away. I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Okay, so there are some considerations. There are some people that are looking at different phases of the menstrual cycle, so follicular phase, luteal phase, menstruation, all these things. And what we do see is that there are some differences in how the body utilizes nutrients throughout. And the other thing we do know, not just from research, but just from experience, is you do feel different in different times of your cycle. Like you don't always necessarily feel great and super strong around your period, right? So the thought process is that, do we modify nutrition or even like training? Like, do we modify the routine around certain times of the menstrual cycle? And for me personally, with clients, the main determining factor for me is just going to be how they feel, because if there's not a huge difference between how they feel, other than like, hey, I had a couple PMS symptoms for a few days, coach. Okay, no big deal. If there's not like some substantial drop off in strength and performance, then I personally don't change anything with most clients. And I would also pose this question, like, if you are having significant PMS symptoms or significant pain around your menstrual cycle and stuff, it's probably another issue, right? There's probably a reason for that.
Yeah. If you really can't get yourself off the couch and are facing those deep symptoms, then yeah, there could be something else underlying. It's one of those things too, it's very individualized. So depending, like you said, if there is a huge strength drop off, then maybe that's not the week that we program a new PR in that week. Maybe wait for the next week, and instead looking at the individual themselves. If we know that there is a huge strength reduction during that, say, luteal phase, or if it's like, it can be different across everyone no matter what the phase they're into. But I will say it has been helpful when I do nutrient changes. So say whether the person is in a muscle growth phase or in a dieting phase, maybe I won't touch fats that week. Maybe I'll consider maybe some carb reduction, because I know they're going to have a little bit more water retention in that PMS week. And instead, hey, maybe I can just incorporate a little bit more walking, and I may tackle their activity first, depending on where they are in the cycle. So when looking at their weeks, knowing and understanding their length of cycle over a period of time, once we've worked together for a good amount of time and I understand their body, then hey, that will also help dictate what moves I make next. So it has been helpful, but again, it's very individualized.
Yeah. So to summarize that, it would really, you'd have to pay attention to the trends and see if there's any significant difference enough to warrant some kind of change.
Yeah.
Right. And for a lot of people, I'm in agreement with you. For a lot of people, I'm probably looking more at the activity and training side of things a little bit more than the nutrition side, just because outside of maybe some cravings or something, it's really the performance and the mood and the strength and things that tend to drop more so than anything else.
Oh yeah. And
sure.
They'll definitely let you know too, being like, hey, this is like trash.
Right. Yep. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have in here. Cool.
Yeah, I think.
Well,
those are all it.
I think we've covered everything. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This was a great topic. Thanks for suggesting it.
Hey, thank you. Anytime. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I will. So I'll reshare this, and I'll invite you as a collaborator, so it'll post it up on your page.
Perfect.
And we'll do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Austin.
right. You have a great rest of your day.
You have a good night. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.